Hello, welcome back to another edition of the Everyday People podcast. Today we are talking about creative compromise, when you should, when you shouldn't, and how you tell the difference.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I was thinking about this too, that like a good way, I think particularly we want to talk about this as we're kind of, navigating what project is going to go next and financing and things like that. And like, the particular thing that has us thinking about creative compromises, I thought of this phrase of like, when good advice means bad news, right? Means
Yes,
bad
that's
news
great.
for you creatively kind of thing, right?
Bitter
Because
pills
I
to
think
swallow.
I think that's part of the creative compromise that we're specifically looking at today. I mean, we'll talk about it kind of at large, but the one that we're facing, right, is like some sound advice that just might mean some bad news, like, or some bad hard decisions have to be made creatively. Yeah. And they're like, and I just say good advice because it's totally flagging a valid thing and not an unworthy thing to make a compromise for, but it will mean significant differences for particularly we're talking about the feature Girls Like Us, which we've mentioned
Yeah.
before on the podcast. But yeah, let's talk about it in general, or yeah, dive in and then we can.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to use girls like us as a bit of a leader through the conversation, maybe. So, just as a bit of a background, we have this feature film called Girls Like Us, which we are very attached to, are very invested in. This is a feature we really want to make, but we want to make a certain way. It's a story that we're really in love with. And, it's not one that we're just is on the docket because we need to keep working. This is something we really love. It does have some really big hurdles in it at the moment that are sort of different from other projects, right? Like universally, we can talk about cast, we can talk about budgets and grants. Like these are things that are going to be a challenge for any project that we're doing. But this one in particular is set in a place that's outside of Canada. It's set with, there's some tones or there are some themes in it that are a little touchy, even though we handle them very well. There are things about this script that make it like, ooh, that might be a problem. That might be a problem. And so it's really navigating those and like how much do you change a thing or,
Yeah. So I think it's interesting, yeah, because we've received, so for example, that, it does deal with sexual assault at one point in the film. And so that's something like as we've kind of gone out and had people that like the script and, in bringing it to their wider team and them, kind of assessing whether it's something they would take on, some of the roadblocks that we've hit or advice that we've been given that otherwise, for one reason or another, we weren't interested and likely won't make the compromise for. And then we can kind of talk about the one that we're up against now. So, you know, in the past, the film is very much like neo-Western kind of thriller, right? It's very much like that's a really stylish genre descriptor of it, but it's a drama, pseudo action thriller, right? About these two teenage girls who kind of need to lean on their athletic prowess to rescue each other from a dicey situation. And so, there's some people that we met who have loved the script, right? But, it didn't have the kind of like, it was a bit too serious for them and that kind of thing, right? Which there is a world in which sometimes, we wouldn't be the first. We've heard stories of this, of lots of famous projects and projects in development where it's like it started off as a drama, but then, the tides change or the network change or what have you, and then it became a comedy or, that's the way it can get greenlit. Then it's something that
Mhm.
can shapeshift in that way. For us, that's never shifting it genre wise in that way has never been, it's just a different movie at that point, right? And we would
Yeah,
rather just try to write a comedy that had some action elements in it
exactly.
than to shift this one. And so that was never, sorry, go ahead.
Well, just on that point. So, I mean, I think that that was pretty clear to us, right? Like, especially because I think you and I both, when we were writing it, were very conscious of they're not young teenagers, like they're in the last parts of their teenage years, and this really does happen. So, we're obviously not shying away from things that are the real experience of young women. But we were very, very careful of making sure that we shot it in a certain way or it was written on the page in a certain way, very respectful, very like in care of the audience, right? So that we're not
Yeah.
exposing it and it's not going to traumatize. And it's also not going to tip anybody's hand. If they don't understand what the shot is, they're not going to know, right? Which I think is a really
Yeah.
important part. But so I think, we were ready to sort of say, well, listen, I mean, if it's not for you, it's not for you. But one of the things that we had always talked about when we were writing it or thinking about financing is that the movie is so primed for corporate sponsorship and brand placement because they're on
Mhm.
dirt bikes and because there's cheerleading. Those are sort of built-in audiences. And then somebody said along the way not too long ago, brand might not want to be involved with a film that is depicting sexual violence or sexual assault. And especially if like we're pitching to them as like, oh, well, if you're looking to get appeal to a young female demographic for your product, and that is the character that it's happening to, then it might just be too close. And it wasn't something that we had really thought about. At least I hadn't thought about that. And it's not like I would want to change the story, but it's those kinds of things where you're like, the plan that we had at one time that we thought was a really, had good potential of working out, like something that we would pursue for financing. Now you're like, oh, I just didn't see the whole picture there. And like, maybe we should think about that a.
Yeah, but that's interesting because that gave me less pause than some of the other stuff that we give, because I mean there's a brand for everything these days. I'm less
Mm,
worried about, like, I mean, I think, yeah, if you're trying to pitch to Dove, might they be a bit skittish? Sure, right? But would a tampon company, you know what I mean, or would a
right.
company that special, like, you know what I mean? I think in this similarly, when you're trying to, we could find that is bought into that ethos or already talks about that subject matter, or causes, like, you have brands that support, sexual assault funds and like the education around it and that kind of thing. So you've already aligned yourself with this theme and an infrastructure that touches on education and things about it. So I felt less pause there. Like that was one of those where I felt like I don't think we need to compromise. Or like, I mean, if Dove comes to the table and put some money on, like, is there, but to the degree that we would make that creative compromise before we're talking to any brand, or
Yeah.
before a brand raises what their like, their flags might be, or kind of thing. I don't think so. And to the point I was saying earlier about, what was I first talking about when it came, like, the first set of, oh yeah, the genre difference. So to the point I was talking about earlier with the genre difference, yeah, we also know that just like for the story we want to tell, that kind of thing, it's not to be played as a comedy, right? Where we want to underscore and highlight, you know, the strength, this kind of like supernatural strength, it seems like, right? That these young teenager girls can genuinely harness, right, in real life, and, reflect, but not like explicitly expose, right? The realities of the kind of situations that they end up in, right? And the kind of dicey parameters that they're in. So certain things that you hear, right? I think you just automatically know whether or not it's, or more instinctively, right? You know what's not going to happen or not. I think similarly, this is one that I think is a TBD creative compromise. So early on in the process, we've had this project in the background for about 5 or 6 years now. So ever so often, it has a little bit of steam. We have a couple of meetings or that kind of thing, but it kind of might peter out, or it's not the right fit, or that kind of thing. And but one of those, we talked with someone from LA who I think was an EP, or, kind of this person who kind of helps package things sometimes for different companies. And his advice, there's a mom character in there, but she has, and a big difference between the two girls, right, is the idea of like a kind of big class difference, right? And, the foundation with which they're both kind of experiencing life, even though they're both these two-star athletes, just how differently home life shapes the confidence they see within themselves and how they view each other and their self-esteem and that kind of thing. And so the one mom character who's a bit of a deadbeat, has a very small scene. And so he advised, like, add, beefing that up a bit, right? Because that's more likely, as it is right now, it's not going to attract the right stunt cast that might help add value to the film. So that's something that, like, we've definitely toyed with. We haven't made that change formally yet, right? But it is in our back pocket, something that we're open to considering, but we don't want to, not one that we feel is absolutely necessary yet in order for us to get the film financed or cast. Like, it's not like it's being made or broken, whether or not it's getting greenlit, whether or not we can stunt cast, hopefully get someone to stunt cast for, you know,
Yeah.
one or two good monologues in the film. But it's not something we're against either.
Totally. And I mean, I think we talked about that a little bit on the notes episode of like, things like that where it's like a suggestion like that or something that you might have to modify that doesn't really interfere with what you've already got, right? It's a bit of an expansion. These things can, a tweak here or there, or like, yeah, beefing something up, as long as it's not stepping on the toes of any other part of it. That is the good compromising, right? Like that is the stuff where it's like, well, there's a lot of freedom there. It's really like, why would we say no? It's not going to hurt anything. And it's going to make the film A, more viable, and B, like maybe better, right? Like that stuff makes sense. It's the stuff that are harder, to compromise on story-wise or just even what you have in your head. So, like, let's talk about location, like, 'cause the film is written in a specific location, and so many people, for so many reasons, have said that's a tricky one, especially in
Well,
today's
no, I
climate.
think let's track it how it's been happening, because I don't think very many people have actually flagged location as an issue until recently. It's become the number one thing that people are talking about.
Right.
Because initially, when we even pitched this, though it was asked, right, it was never, and so it's set right now for Yucca Valley, which is near Joshua Tree out in the west coast of the state. And so it was asked what our intention was, but it was never like never flagged in a way that said like, oh, this is going to be the make or break, or flagged as if that would be the issue why people weren't. I think the more common thing was people who felt like the subject matter might scope a little bit too severely into was it either wasn't comedic enough, right, or a bit too dramatic for them, was the note we got more
Mhm.
overwhelmingly. But recently, and what I was saying about the good advice means bad news thing, and as a part of our 1,000 rejections, right, we're trying to finance this film, get the financing together. So we're reaching out to EPs that one, like, have more experience with at these budget levels and have better understand when you're making that jump from where we're at to, something in the low millions. And so one of those people was Damon D'Oliveira, which some people may or may know from the industry. Lovely human, great person, lots of insight and stuff to share. He was the producing
Mm.
partner to Clement Virgo. If you're not familiar, look these people up. You should know them. They are making work and making moves in our industry here in Canada. And so we had kind of like a preliminary conversation with him, and that was the biggest focus for him, was that the location is set in America, right? And essentially, then without explicitly saying our two leads are American, right? You inherit or like that they're anything else, right? Then they're going to be assumed to be American. So essentially, we have a film that we
Yeah.
are trying to shoot in America, or that we're trying to shoot, wherever, but it's about essentially an American place, right? And American kids. And up until now, before, the questions of location were more about, well, where could you shoot it for the cheapest and still sell it as that location? It wasn't necessarily
That's
this
a
thing
good
which Damon flagged, which was in this current climate, right? Given the global feeling attitude towards the United States in general, but also our own elbows up era and our homegrown culture, and really trying to, and that's of course,
Are you back?
no, my mom just keeps trying to call me, so that's why I interrupted her. Yeah, because of the sorry, so because of the kind of homegrown era that we're in, the elbows up era that we're in, which of course, as you know, we made dinner with friends in the spirit that we made it to platform Canadian artists for that reason, is of course incredibly important to us, right? But in dealing with all of the, what's happening politically and in society at large, had never really registered just how less likely Canadian funders are going to be, right? And that includes Telefilm, that
Mhm.
includes private financing, that includes Ontario Creates and CMF, right? To champion or front load, and especially be first in on a project that is essentially about an American place and about a echo out of their culture, whether it is being made completely by a Canadian team or not.
Yeah, I mean, and that is a really good point, and you're completely right. So, like, before then, the biggest thing had been is that there is no co-production agreement between the States and Canada, but there are with other places, and so it was really a matter of people highlighting for us of like, well, you're going to one of the only places where your tax credits, are gonna be null and void, and you'll have to have a producing partner inside that country and trust that they're going to do the tax credits on their end. Like, it just became very complicated. Like, it wasn't something that was really recognized here. And so, at one point during TIFF, we were meeting with people from Spain because we have a better co-production with them there. And there was a place that we could film there. But you're right, so that it would read like it is Yucca Valley, right? So,
Yeah, yeah.
so we were trying to solve that location problem, and that's what I was thinking of. And then now this is a different location problem, or like problem with that location.
And this
And
is one
so
that will impact creative, right? And
it
comes with
will.
certain creative
Yeah.
compromises. Yeah.
And
Because I
so,
would say
but it's
the ones before were more like how you would describe, which is the kind of creative compromise that doesn't necessarily cost anything from the story, right? So it's
yes,
easy to make.
yes, it's
It's
a
like,
reduction
if
compromise, right?
yeah, production compromise, exactly. Yeah, that didn't require a creative one.
But so now here, when you start get it's the 1-2 punch, right? Because lots of people have said, well, could you, shoot if you need to shoot in a desert, could you shoot in like Alberta? And it's like, no, that's the wrong kind of desert. Osoyoos in BC is kind of, I think it's small, but it is the right kind of desert, or like we could cheat it with a bit of help from VFX. And so then you're like, okay, well, that was always on the conversation around tax credits. But now it's like, well, could we like you're saying, like shift the creative and make it a small town in BC? Like, could it be a small town in Osoyoos? You know, and so many of the elements could stay the same. Or could we, I guess the other thing was, could we just make it a nameless town in a nameless city, in a nameless country? And if you're American, you're
Yeah.
probably going to assume it's America. If you're Canadian, you'll probably assume it's Canadian. Like, but then does that do enough for the granting agencies who care about that? Like, you know, like in that compromise, you basically not get either of what you want. You have
Well,
to go away.
and I would argue that, like, before that compromise could even be on the table, which was what my flag is. And so this is what I mean by good advice but bad news, right? Which is that Damon raised a very, very, very sound point, right? And the climate and the relationships happening, and it's so funny because so often you kind of hear about like artists should just go make art and we should just do this and that kind of thing. But we're seeing in real time, right, in this way that is very like seemingly innocuous, just how connected they are, right? It went from,
Yeah.
well, there's not a problem. How do we just figure out how to shoot this more efficiently because there's not tax credits, to like, is this the move we're really trying to make and support now? And it's, supporting the film has a whole different kind of meaning to it, right? That
Yes.
doesn't really have anything to do with the film. And doing a location change, one of the things, and right now we've just recently had this conversation, so I don't think we would 100% say that there isn't a way forward. But the thing for me that needs to be worked around, which is we're talking about the one thing that America does have that other territories don't necessarily in the same way, aside from just desert, is a very strongly more widely understood, at least within, between the UK, North America, South America, Black American culture, right? That we
Yeah.
all identify, can have like are absorbed, are influenced by. And what that means is you can shoot in a lot of places in America and believe, because it's set in a kind of military based town, is the idea, which does exist in Yucca Valley. And wrap your head around there being this like one high school with like 40% Black kids and some Hispanic kids and some Caucasian kids and like a mixed demographic, and believe and understand kind of the culture of that. And that's partially because we do consume so much American media too. Whereas set goes now in Osoyoos, BC, I as a viewer know, not even just as a writer or director, know that I don't know nowhere in BC where this place exists, where this kind of school exists. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
It feels like much more of an anomaly where you're going to see these two young Black girls, you know what I mean, ripping around in the desert in that way and that kind of thing. Our
Yeah.
culture doesn't reflect that sincerely, right? And so it
Mm.
quickly makes something about the story, I think, even subconsciously feel less authentic, right? And even if we are saying it's any place and any name, funny enough, there was a movie, I can't remember which one it was, that Kelly saw at TIFF, and because I believe this sometimes, which is, and they did a similar thing. I think it was shot in Europe somewhere, and they didn't want to identify the place, but the whole time, it's it's this Black woman and this white woman, and it becomes a kind of pseudo-erotic affair in a castle of some kind. But the whole time she's kind of wondering, where the hell are they? Like, where do they? And I think it was a period piece, right? You're just trying to
Right.
understand where in the world is this happening, because especially for people of color, right? Where in the world they are and what that means for them politically and how they exist and the spaces they show up in, right, can mean very different things, right? Would mean something different in how you're absorbing the story and so on and so forth. So there might be
Yeah.
a way forward to change it to Osoyoos or any name, any place. But right now it feels like we're creating a world much more, feels a lot less
Real.
authentic, even though the stakes of what might happen to them would still be real and valid and that kind of thing. The world it exists in, and there's something to the fact that it's an army base and the military presence, right? And how
Yeah.
that opens up this sense of its own justice in this little desert town, and that the police don't necessarily have the same power here, but it's not necessarily like this army community. Like, you know what I mean? The lines are
Okay.
blurred and it's a bit of a desperate town. So Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, and it's like, I mean, the authenticity and just, like, the believability of it, right? Is like, it's one thing if we wanna say this is a magical place and, it's Bridgerton and everybody's gets along great, and it's like a revision of history, but, like, that's not what this is at all, right? Like, we're not trying to lay
Yeah.
layers of, disbelief or anything onto it, so attitude doesn't really fly with this one. I mean, so the let's just keep on with this. So, like, the advice has been to really try to get, even if it's off the record, but like a blunt answer from some of the funding bodies in Canada of like, if we shot it in Canada, like say we did do a Soyuz, but like the implication is it is Yucca Valley, right? Like we're gonna cheat it for Yucca Valley. It is an American story. That is what everybody should understand, where the story takes place. I mean, I guess, do you think we would ever get that? I feel like we did ask them, and the answer they gave us was about as honest as we might get. But like,
No,
what do we then?
too many things have changed globally, nationally,
Oh, yeah, you think
politically
so?
since the 4 or 5 years. Yeah, the Talent Watch program was a completely different program when we were talking to them, let alone I mean, the last 2 years have changed so much. Since 4 years ago, we were not as elbows up. I mean, we still don't have
Yeah,
the money, but 4 years ago we weren't. And I think the I think every country, I think the thing too, whenever it comes to, I think they might give us an even more blunt answer, but I think regardless of, I think that it's a hurdle we'd have to be prepared to answer for.
mm,
I think it's less if you're shooting it yeah, to me, I don't see, I mean, movie magic anywhere, but there's nowhere in, like, I could see still shooting in another territory and selling it as thing, but I don't see where it gets shot in Canada and effectively sells it the way that we want to. Though I think that might help things. But I think whenever things are oversubscribed as they are now, and there's lots of people that it makes it very easy for another project who has a script that's as good, but it's gonna be shot here and it's all gonna be Canadians and they already have the star attached and they already have the thing, make it an easier yes. I think that's what in even if they said it was fine and we applied, right, without significantly answering that question or answering for that,
cool.
and so people could still feel like it is more Canadian film than anything else, right? We would be running the risk of, I think the biggest difference that might be made, again, this is all hypothetical, just from the biggest difference would be if another player had already committed and came in for their 49%, right? Like if it's the
Yeah.
difference between us, an agency like a Telefilm or a national funder being first in and, first in on 5 projects, or them being the closing, 50% on money that's already there with a partner that is gonna like feel like the production plan of it is like more underway and the potential of it, then I think that could override um,
Yes.
certain things. But
And that makes sense, honestly, right? Because at that point, you're pretty much helping something that you already think is going to succeed, right? And
yes,
so it's not like you're really giving a chance or like it's not nearly the risk, right? If you're trying to choose between two projects, one's very Canadian centric, one isn't ours. And like you hope that you bet on the right horse kind of thing, right? But if we're coming to them last and say, listen, we've got good stars, we've got the financing, almost half the financing, and then with everything else, if Telefilm was the last one in, yeah, I think you're right. As long as it still met some of the other things that they
yeah,
would
like the
want.
technical requirements. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, when I
exactly.
say override, I more mean as far as like, again, I just think everything is oversubscribed. So you could have,
Yeah,
only enough to award 10 projects, but there's 20 really good ones. And then that's when that stuff I think really,
yeah.
really, 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 really starts to matter. But yeah, I think that's
So
the
let
biggest creative compromise that has really put the pause on the table in terms of, for me, in terms of just what that would mean to the story. Because again, I think there is a story we could tell about two young Black girls that are from Canada that live in the thing, but does look slightly different and it does feel slightly different than what we actually have here
yeah,
and now. And I would argue you know, it'd go from being more mixed to like it's things like they'd likely be the only two Black girls at whatever school
yeah,
or base that they're working at, because it's not going to be in a major city that this thing is set. It's not going to be. I mean, even in our major cities, the demographics of black people. I mean, you ever seen Vancouver, black people in Vancouver on TikTok? They're like, "Where are you? Is
Oh, no.
anybody here?"
Yeah, yeah.
So in
Yeah.
those ways, it would change the story, right? Which would help in some ways. The thing, like you'd understand their solidarity and their bond to each other even more. But just
Yes.
it would just take a thorough look at the script, really, and like, what do we lose? What do we gain, right? And are we interested in giving that up? Because at this point now, too, we've been thinking of this thing for 6 years of these, because we also went in 2021, right, to Yucca Valley to show you how much of a bump it wasn't 4 or 5 years ago. We were able to use development money we received from national agencies to do that trip, to do a rewrite
Yes.
on it, actually. Right?
Yeah.
Like, and so Tanya has been there before, was very familiar. The story originated with her. And so that's why it is set there and it is a very real place. And then we did this trip, a development trip in 2021, where we spent a week, 10 days out in Yucca Valley, right? Just rewriting it, looking at the script, trying to make the character stronger, looking at the area, just getting a feel. So for at least the last 5 years, right? Like, there's sequences I've been imagining in my head
Yeah.
in a desert like area like that, that's that, and what have you. So, like I said at the beginning, it's not even to say it's not possible, but off rip, when I heard that, like this immediately was like, well, what does that really mean
Yeah.
culturally, and how these two girls would actually exist in this scope in a way that they wouldn't uh if it was set here and under different parameters and things like that.
100%. And it's like, it's interesting because, yeah, my next question to you would be is like, so do you want to play a game and actually consider it? Or like, would we actually consider it? But I mean, I think it's worthwhile to actually consider it even so that we can rule it out completely, right? Like if that's where
Hmm.
we end up, right? But like I think everything you just said are such good points. The script as it is now, I mean, lots of people have always also asked, like, do both leads need to be black? And we're like, yes, because
Yeah.
it's not the centerpiece of the movie, right? And the
So
minute
that's
one
a
of
note that we did get, and we did make the change on. It didn't feel like a compromise, but it was a good update. Sorry, I didn't need to interrupt you, but I just wanted to
no, no,
touch on
that's
that.
okay. But yeah, like, so we've had those kids, the girls, be different races. And the best way to make sure that the whole thing doesn't get overshadowed by a race dynamic, right? Was to
Yeah.
just eliminate the race dynamic, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's
Yeah.
not what we set out to write about. That's not what is the core of the story. And so it's such a big topic that it can, like, factor in and overshadow. So
Yeah, and
yeah,
particularly because even though within the story, the young white girl, she was actually the one that was coming from, for lack of a better term, a lower class or a rougher upbringing or that kind of thing. But even when, the young black woman, because the black girl in the friendship dynamic, right, is the one who's a little bit more headstrong and bossy and is the one who first has to initiate the rescue, then it's like feedback of the savior trope and that kind of thing and
exactly.
all of it. And it was like, it's like we need to just get that out of the way, because the story really is, it's way more about class and like upbringing and how that informs your sense of self than it is about that other stuff. And so that was a change that felt right. And again, it didn't you know, change. Just, the best way, a very smart executive that we had read it, just said all it would do was change it from like, a movie about two teens to a capital B Black movie, which, we don't have a problem with that, right? Like
Mhm.
that's just better understanding kind of how the movie would be seen or positioned, but that's fine for us kind of thing. And so we made that change. But yeah, it's very interesting actually having this conversation where it's like, we have made some, but I will say there's almost like an immediate sense of, right? Like, I think once you hear a thing that's worth really taking stock of or really will have impact, and then the other ones that you're just like, are just not like, there are certain things we haven't even had to really even talk about. It's like, well, we're not making it a comedy. Like, that's just not even, you know what I mean? And then there's
Yeah.
other things where you're just like, right, which is how it felt the other day talking to Damon. You're like, oh, yeah, 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 yeah. I guess
Yeah.
the climate has changed a little, hasn't it? Right, right. What were
Yes.
you gonna ask? What was the thought? What was the game?
Well, just like, okay, so let's say that we're down to change it. Let's just like go through the list of the things that we'd have to change. We might not have time to do that, but I think
I don't think we'll have time to do that. That sounds like a painful exercise.
it does. But I mean, I do think
Uh-huh.
I think what we've done here is like really set up the challenges of the stuff that is like important for the story to like to
Yeah,
hold
yeah,
and like a little bit of why those are important. It's not like we haven't thought of other things before, but, like, I think the challenge now is to see whether or not we can keep those things. Is there a way to make it make sense, right? So it's not this glaring question mark of, like, "Where the fuck are we?" And if you are like, it seems like we're in a Soyuz, but there's no way that this would actually happen anywhere near there.
Mhm.
You know, is there a way to get these 2 girls in Canada, near a desert, near an ocean? I mean,
Well,
the
here's
we'd
what
have
I would argue actually that is as much of a here's where I'm kind of because I feel like I mean this is personally also what I think is happening in my life, which is like the old way and the old way of looking at things, doing things or whatever just needs to be torched, right? Like transformation era it feels like I'm in and think how I think or look at things. And so I would argue that doing that, right, seeing how we can shapeshift it so that we can get enough money out of Canada so that we can still shoot the thing, possibly, hopefully, it'll never be enough, really, anyways, kind of thing, right?
yeah,
Is one way, is one exercise. Or
yeah,
is the exercise saying, okay, so we're not getting any money from Canada and we need to hit the international circuit hard. We need to go and find American producers or like, like that's as much of a use of our time and energy as possible. Because what we're saying here, we're saying is it might be less likely Canada will come on board because it doesn't feel like a Canadian story. So whose story
mhm,
does it feel like? The brands that we would probably be engaging with likely wouldn't be national, like only Canadian ones. They'd either be international or US in some of the ones that we're
yeah,
thinking about or what have you. That I would
yeah.
argue, like, yeah, it could be just as worthwhile to have some conversations with some of the US counterparts and say, is there interest in something like this? Knowing that is God is the trailer's out, right? The
Yes.
minute something like that comes out and triggers a frenzy, everyone is like,
Yeah,
oh, did they already start working and looking for their other things?
that's very
Is
true,
that
and I mean, more than we actually need to revise the deck or, like, shoot a previs or, like, anything, it's just like,
we
you
need
just need
different buyers?
yeah, yeah. You know what? Actually, remind me afterwards, I have something to say about all this.
Yeah.
That
So
was
it just feels like you have a product, right? And so there's either the option of do I make this product what the customers here are asking for, or do I go to another region where they need what I'm making, right? And try to get them like try to pierce through that noise of the other people trying to like you get what I'm saying. But I
no,
think
no,
a lot of
totally.
the times we do the first thing because it seems like the soft money is here. We should tap into it, all of that kind of stuff. But if it might require the project to shapeshift too much, and the reality that we haven't actually taken it out beyond these borders, this is kind of what we're looking for in this additional EP title or what have you, right? Is who
Right.
are some of the beyond the scope of our reach and what we know here in Canada, right? Who can either
Yeah.
help bring that other partner to the table or what have you from outside of things? Because even I still think there could be some potential play for South Africa or like Dakar. I was seeing some stuff too.
Mhm. I mean, and America. I mean, it's not like, that would make the most sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it is a lot to think about, and like you said, if we do, end up coming up a bit short, right? Like that I do think Telefilm, or whatever agencies in Canada, like, we there would still be ways that we would be able to maybe shorten or sorry, I'm gonna start that again. Like you said before, it's not as if Canada wouldn't come on at all, right? But, like, it
Yeah.
does
Yeah.
seem that the first thing first is that we do for this project, if we wanna keep it intact as much as possible, is to find either an American or another territory partner for sure. That does seem like, what we're looking for.
Yeah.
But it's a good
Because like
exercise. It's a good exercise to go through and see, how much you can bend in order to keep your projects moving forward, like having these conversations and listening to people who are either asking you questions, poking holes, giving you
mhm.
suggestions, even if they're like, "Have you thought of this? Have you thought of that?" You don't have to take that advice, but, like, "Have you thought of those things?" Like, it's all good, discussions to have to sort of know where you can make compromises, where you can't, or, like, and, like, what is a small compromise? What is one that seems small, but then will just eventually unravel the project in ways that, you have to be able to think through.
And funny enough, I think it just is the nature of what we do in try to make because I would argue that on a completely different in a completely different scale, for men to be, so this is a project about two artist exes that run into each other in Japan, we would have a much better chance at getting that funded, even though it's going to be shot in Japan than this one, because Canada and Japan are doing a lot of work together, right? In terms of
Yes,
like, I don't
there's
think there's
huge.
a full co-production thing, but I know that Export Canada has sent delegations recently. We've had an ambassador like come here and vice versa. And like working and kind of opening up those doors culturally between Japan and Canada is something that is a lot more front and center now. So even though it still would be shot in Canada, but is a bit about kind of like these two Canadian artists kind of running into each other there and that kind of trip or what have you. I think we could, like, I could more easily see the case that we could make, right, or the benefit of it funding where it would still qualify than possibly this, than
Yeah,
for this project. So it's interesting,
yeah,
like, what would create a possible compromise for one project, right, would might be the same thing that would make another one easier or more likely to advance. So it is really interesting.
it
Yeah,
is.
I think ultimately, like, it can feel, I think the number one thing when it comes to creative compromises, just to speak on it generally, is the reality of it is sometimes because we've also had it where, working in episodic, where like you're not the person that's securing the financing as an attached showrunner or creator or what have you, right? And some requests come down. And it's interesting because sometimes it's, I often come up against like there's a balance between what, producers who are packaging and trying to get the thing financed to greenlight or whatever asking to do and what can be accommodated, right? Can this person be set here? Can we do this in Montreal so that we can get this and that kind of stuff? And then there's that up against what you think is really right for the show. And that can be really tough to negotiate because yeah, you can make a lot of things work, right? Or there are some things that can make work. Sometimes you say yes and then you get to it and it doesn't really quite fit. But now, whether or not we can add this in is going to be whether or not we can get 10 million more dollars to make this show, right? And do this thing. I'm not giving out the $10 million to finance this, right? So it feels, I have a harder time being like, I'll voice that maybe saying like, no, I don't think it's dead or what have you, or maybe this, or we might run into this roadblock, but it's very hard to tell off bat sometimes like how to, and it can feel very difficult to say no to that kind of thing too, especially when it's like off of a commission story or based off of a book that we're trying to adapt to something else or what have you, where the source material doesn't wholly belong to you. Likely in
Yes,
those
yes.
instances, the source material, the producers have actually lived with it longer than you have possibly, right? If
Yes.
you own the source material, I think it's a little bit easier, or I feel more like the confidence I have with saying no for certain things on Bria, right? Or for others, I might not in certain other shows, right? Or where it's not,
Oh, very
yeah,
good
that
point.
attachment to the source material isn't there in the same way. There have been times where you end up making the creative compromise. I'll tell you, like, from the limited experience we had, it becomes like a dog's breakfast real quick. It can be. It really can in terms of like, and it's weird. You can kind of feel it and you can kind of see it. And there's two things too, where it's like, the way you want to tell the story is not going to enable this addition or whatever, but there could be another writer, right? Which we see happen sometimes is like this person's let go or they've added another person to take a different path because how I see the story, I can't see where this fits. And the network is like, LOL, cute girl. All right. So we're going to hire somebody else who's going to come in and take this pass at this and get it in here because we promised 6 sponsors that we're going to show their fucking product in this way. It's not always so belligerent, but that is essentially it, right? In a hyperbolic
Yes.
description, that's what's happening. And that feels tougher. Because for better or for worse, as strong as my personality is, I still want to please people. I still want them to be happy with the work
Yeah.
that I'm doing and that kind of thing. And I wanted it at home. And sometimes it's hard to tell. It's like until you're 2 or 3 drafts in and it's not really working and it's not working for the producers and what you trying to work on until you're like, oh, we just need to drop this part of it. This is why, is because there's no real space in here or what have you. It can
Yeah.
feel way more severe than it probably should to be like, hey, so we tried this. It's not working. I think we should put it to the table because the entire finance plan requires it to come together and it's not clicking for you. It's tough. Yeah.
Yeah. It is really, really tough. Yeah, I don't have any answers or any real insights beyond any of that. It's like a dog's
Yeah.
breakfast is what it becomes. It's just I think if you're not on the same page and then everybody's just like, "Oh, well, we all see that there's a problem here," nobody wants to say or like, you're just identifying the problem in real time. You're like, "What's off here?" And then 2 days later or 2 months later, it's like, "Oh, we have a real problem here." And then everybody's in the mix trying to fix the problem, and
Yeah.
it just
And
just
somehow the problem is never not just walking away from the money that you're probably not going to get either. That's never the solution to the
Yes,
problem.
yes, exactly,
It's
exactly.
never the solution.
yeah, so, like, everybody wants to save it, and it's just kinda went sideways somehow, and, like, nobody wants to be like, "You know what? We all need to take a step back and let the writers do the writing thing, and the producers can do the producing thing." It just becomes everybody's like, "Oh, no, all hands on deck." Anyway, not my favorite scenario either. It is way easier, like you said, to make compromises if you're in charge of the project, like, if it is your creative material. Yeah, and I guess
Yeah,
we'll
and
just
I think I often, for me, some certain creative compromises in for hire jobs are easier for me to make because I work on my own original stuff, right? Like sometimes it's like, hey, listen, baby, it's your show. I'm just shooting it. What do you want? You know what I mean? Where do you want to put the thing or what have you? Unless I fundamentally think it's gonna be like, oh no, this is gonna ruin the thing or what have you. That's what
well,
you
I'll
want,
say that
then
I think, because you said this before too, so I know you believe this too. It's like you do wanna care, right? Like, whether you're for
yeah,
hire or it's your work, like, you wanna work on stuff that you care about, right? But it's the difference between being like, "Well, it's not my choice, but that's not a bad way to go." Okay, right? Like, somebody
yes,
has
yes,
it's
yes,
like, alright, one way or
yes,
another, one half dozen of the other. It's another when you're like, you're not killing any darlings on something like that, right?
yes, yes,
It's
yes,
all just
yes,
like, "Okay, that works," right? And you
yeah,
truly
yeah, yeah,
believe it,
yeah.
but then when it's your own stuff, it's just like, no, it's just harder,
Yeah.
it's harder to do, right? But,
Yeah,
like
like one tough creative compromise, like on one of the thing we were developing, it became like where we were having to consider directors from the other territory, and I think that was one. I mean, that ended up becoming quite a seismic conversation too, right? Because while we were down to go along, it really didn't feel right for the show, and understanding all the reasons, right? But it wouldn't have been our choice by any stretch of the imagination, kind of thing. And
yeah,
so we wanted to compromise, but they wanted us to also be happy about the compromise. And unfortunately, that was just one beat too far for me. Couldn't. Let's see.
that is
And
such
it
a pet
can that sorry, what did you say?
that's such a pet peeve of mine. I was on another call not too long ago, and somebody's just like, "Well,
Yes.
you don't look happy," and I'm like, "I'm not, but so what?"
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, I'm gonna
it's
give you what this is what I would say. You
continue
can
to
get what you want. It's
it's
either
like
I get what I want. If what you want is me happy, then I'm gonna get what I want. If you get
yes,
what you want, I'm down to give it to you, but you're not also like I'm not gonna perform happiness about it too, kind of thing, when I'm really
exactly, which
not.
doesn't
The win is that
exactly.
you're already getting what you want.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean you're pouting or being resistant or dragging your feet or any of those.
No.
It's like, because that is a fucking stupid, right? Like, be an adult, like, there's no room to be a baby. But yeah, it's just like, I can easily just say, it's like, yeah, no, I don't have to be happy about it. That's not my choice. That's not the way I want to do it, but I will do it this way. Like, that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But
But
yeah,
yes, it
stuff
can
like
be
that is
tricky.
pretty funny.
Yes, it
I
is. So,
have,
I mean, like we said, we don't really have any tips on how to navigate that or make that better because it really is all a case by case thing too, and it depends on the
yeah,
temperament of the company you're with. Because then you have versions of this where it's like it's less about what needs to happen to the creative, but the production company has now been sold, or the development executive has now switched seats, and so you have a new
yeah,
executive, right, who sees the show a completely different way, kind of thing, and it can be difficult to find the voice to be like, hey. So I know that you're new here, but we've been working on this for the last 3 years, and we were pretty happy with the direction it was going. And the notes you
yeah,
provided here are for a different show, right? And
yeah,
it's funny, I can say this so cavalierly, and it's funny, wait till us now we're recording a podcast. But in the moment, when it feels like these are the people that you need to essentially make happy or feel like they love this version of the show so that they'll greenlight it, right?
yeah,
It's not easy always to find the voice in that moment or to find the words. Hopefully you're working with good producers who can help mediate or translate that
yeah,
appropriately between the two and kind of suss that
yeah.
out on the network side. And we have had instances, right, where we worked with
Oh, for
producers
sure.
in development who have absolutely, you
Mhm.
know, done exactly that and been able to identify like, oh, this is what's happening here or what have you. Let's pause before we dive in on these notes and kind of reassess, kind of
Yeah.
thing. But yeah, it does happen. And so if you've experienced it or are going through it, you're not alone. It really just is, it's par for the course, I think, in what we do. And it's just each thing. I mean, I think this is when creative community becomes its most valuable, right? It can be helpful to talk to someone else who's been in development or been, in the same place where you are, and it's like, oh my God, yeah, this is how I
Yeah.
handled it. And or, you hear things so much worse or so much better or whatever, but you're just like, okay, it's not just me because it so much of how we work ends up feeling so siloed until you're on set and it feels like, you see all the people and all the things and all that stuff. But yeah, you're
For
not
sure.
alone in that
I
experience.
mean, being on set, even just to get to set, right? Like something's in production, right? And
Yeah,
so much
yeah.
stuff just dies on the vine, right? Like just doesn't get into production. It's such a big part of it. And yeah, like because compromises were made, because compromises weren't made, but like we're all trying to get stuff into production, right? Like that is, it's just what you're willing to do in order to get there, how far you're willing to bend. All right.
Yeah.
We're this one's gone long, as they all seem to, but, we'll leave it there, I guess, and, we'll see what happens next.